Hi, I'm Daryl Hutz, Professor of Education and the Department Chair.
Hi, I'm Tanya Sturtz, Associate Dean of the School of Arts, Education, and Humanities.
Recently, we had the pleasure to speak to the authors Sandra Neal Wallace and Rich Wallace, and the super talented artist Charlie Palmer. He illustrated their recent book, The Teacher's March: How Selma's Teachers Changed History. The book was chosen as Keene State College's Education Department's Book of the Year.
We trust that you will enjoy the opportunity to listen to our conversation about the creative process and how that ties to their personal passions that drive their advocacy. This book shares the story of Reverend F.D. Reese and how he led the Teachers Only March in Selma, Alabama in 1965. The book captures a critical moment in our nation's history that continues to resonate in modern times. An original illustration from the book is the new addition to the David E. White Children's Literature Collection. I want to welcome our guests today. First, Charlie Palmer painted the Times Magazine America Must Change cover, July 2020, called In Her Eyes. In 2021, he was the recipient of the Fine Art and Fashion Visual Artist Award presented by Neiman Marcus and won a Grammy for Best R&B Album Cover for the Bigger Love album cover for John Legend. He has also illustrated other children's books, including There's a Dragon in My Closet and Mama Africa, for which he received the 2018 Coretta Scott King and John Steptoe New Talent Award. He has 3 children's books he's illustrated coming out next year, and one was just released, Keep Your Head Up by Aaliyah King Neal. Sandra Neal and Rich Wallace collaborated on the research and writing of the Teacher's March. They are both talented writers in their own right and have also collaborated on First Generation, 36 Trailblazing Immigrants and Refugees Who Make America Great, Bound by Ice, a true North Pole survival story, and Blood Brothers, Jonathan Daniels and His Sacrifice for Civil Rights. Sandra Neal is an author and advocate for change who is known for her investigative journalism and books for young readers that focus on people who break barriers and change the world. She is the recipient of the 2019 Outstanding Women of New Hampshire Award for Peace and Nonviolence. Rich has extensive experience as a writer and editor. He has published more than 25 novels for kids and teenagers. Rich also served as a senior editor for Highlights for Children's Magazine and continues to write the monthly Timber Toes feature for the publication. Welcome. I have a few questions I'm going to use to guide our conversation today. And we got some of these ideas from both the art and education department, so that's where some of these questions have come. So we thought we'd first focus on the process. What is your process? So Charlie, how do you as an artist develop your ideas? What is your process for creating your art, both individual pieces and illustrations for children's books?
Okay, so when we're talking fine art, it's very different than children's books. So let me just kind of talk about the children's books right now. I typically will get the manuscript and I'll read it once or twice just to see if I can connect with it first. Secondly, I go through like a third time and I make very quick notations as to frames that I can imagine. I don't sketch a frame, I just make a note that looks like that. I can see a visual there. So I'll go through it, that's a third time. Then a fourth time, I'll get a separate sheet of paper, and then I'll start drawing out little thumbnail boxes, like storyboards. And I'll very loosely sketch out what I can imagine these images looking like. And they're almost stick figures because they're really thumbnail quickly done. Then I'll go back in and tighten those up. And then I'll enlarge them and use a light box and do a little bit more detail. Then I bring in a photographer. So at that point, there are certain poses, certain looks I want, In the case of this book, also because we're documenting a piece of history, there's a lot of material that I have to kind of go over and reference material, including this incredible church. And there were lots of photographs as I Googled the church, the inside, the interior, as well as the exterior, although it has since 1960 changed quite a bit. So I am using and referring to that. So sometimes as I'm doing my sketches, I am referring and imagining people being placed in these situations. But there was a lot, from what I recall, a lot of reference material, even of some of the protests that took place at the time. So it was really like a combination of things, because there was rich information in the manuscript, and then there were in good descriptions. Then it's Googling and finding a lot of information there, and then working out what seems to work visually from a standpoint of almost frame by frame, how I could imagine creating it.
No, thank you. And how is it different than the fine arts, just as an overview? Because we do have a lot of art majors too.
You know, so it's funny because I talk to art students all the time, even right now where I'm at this university. And what I talk about is how important thumbnails are. It's like, get that idea down. It's like if you're a writer at rough draft, the first things that flow through you, write it down. It's going to be something material that you might be able to use. Maybe you'll discard it. Same thing happens in the process of getting an idea for a fine art piece. I'm asking the question, what's the story I want to tell, or the narrative? Then when I talk to students, I talk about do some thumbnails, do a lot of thumbnails. And it's usually the very first idea or the last idea. It's going to come to you easily, or it's going to be a challenge. And if it's more of a challenge, you're going to dig deeper. So it's one or the other. But I say all that, and then I say I've discarded thumbnails when it comes to my fine art. Typically, I have an idea, I see it clearly, I see the composition clearly, and I go directly to canvas and I start painting it. Sometime I might, again, hire a model or something and have a photographer shoot it. And sometime I might be looking at a portfolio of photos from a photographer, and I'll reach out to that photographer and buy the rights to use that image. I always have some form of reference, whether I'm doing a children's book or a fine art piece, a reference. And I always talk about that. It's a reference point. You're not tied to copy this thing for image by image, light by light, and shape by shape. It's just a reference point when there's certain things you're not certain about. And so that's where it's slightly different.
Yeah. No, thank you. Now, Rich and Sandra, with the writing, because it's a true story, you did the research and the writing component. So what is the process? What inspires your ideas? What is your process for putting it together and then getting to that final product?
I'll talk a little about what inspired this particular book. We're actually in heavy research for another book. We wrote a book, you mentioned it, Blood Brother, about a civil rights hero from Keene, New Hampshire, where we're sitting right now, Jonathan Daniels. And we were in Selma, Alabama. And in fact, we were in Brown Chapel. And we were interviewing a woman who, Joyce Parrish O'Neill, who was a historian at Brown Chapel, who'd been attending that church for her entire life. And she was sitting in the pew with us talking about how when Martin Luther King came through the doors for the first time and she heard him speech in Alabama, talking about John Lewis and all the other great people who'd come through that church. And we went to lunch with Joyce, and she mentioned that her mom had marched just prior to Bloody Sunday, just prior to the march to Montgomery. She had marched in a teacher's procession where they left school and they walked to the courthouse to demand their right to vote. And we said, wow, we've never heard of that. We've done lots of research on the civil rights and voting rights movement. We've never heard of that story. Tell us a bit more about it. And, you know, she told us her experiences, and then we went back home, finished the book on Jonathan Daniels, and immediately we went back to Selma and started interviewing folks like Reverend Reese, who had led the procession, and Coach Huggins, who had been a part of that, and anybody who was still around that we could speak to, who had been involved in this really important event that kind of got overshadowed by so many of the other voting rights issues and events that took place immediately after that.
You had talked, Tanya, about our approach to research. And when we decide to do a book together, whether it's good or bad, both of us read everything and pour through and watch videos of anything that's available on that subject. And then usually what we do is compile a list of at least 100 questions that we really feel that we need to have answered. And it may take 2 years or 3 years to get what we really feel is needed. But we usually have a little bit more information than when we had for the Teachers March. In this case, like Rich said, even though it was a turning point in the voting rights movement, there really wasn't a lot of information available to us other than a few articles about the day, some video, some film footage, and some videos of some of the teachers. So we knew that we needed to go to Selma and connect and interview with the teachers who marched, and that we had to act quickly. We call it the urgency of oral history, because this event happened in 1965. And we were lucky enough, like Rich mentioned, to interview Coach Lawrence Huggins, who was a teacher who marched. We interviewed Mrs. Joyce Parrish O'Neill, whose mother marched. And then we were able to interview Reverend Reese, who coordinated and was the leader of the march. And as a matter of fact, we became the last 2 journalists to interview him about the Teachers March. He passed away in 2018.
My first question for Sandra and Rich is, what motivates you to make the choice to take on the projects that how do you go about finding projects? How do you do the decision?
Great question, because there are lots of ideas out there. It's got to be something that really resonates with us personally, something that we want to spend, as Sandra was saying, 2 or 3 years with, because the research is often very intense, and we're known for conducting interviews. We rely on as much printed and textual material as we can, but we're really creating firsthand resources here by doing all these interviews. So again, it's got to be something that we're going to want to pursue, and that we feel is really going to make an important difference in some readers' lives.
We're really drawn to everyday people who break barriers and are hidden in history, because these are hidden narratives. We know about John Lewis, we know about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but really we've found over the years through all of our research that change happens through collectivism and through everyday people and local community leaders. And those are the voices that have been silent or who have been suppressed and are unknown. And we really take it seriously that it's our job that if we can find them and we're able to interview them, that we owe it to humanity and we owe it to civil rights to be able to do that. And that's really what drives us in terms of our decisions. With the Teachers March, as soon as Joyce, I just get chills thinking about that. We're sitting in the pew, and she talks about the Teachers March, and we asked her, do you know anybody who marched? And she paused and her eyes welled up and she said, my mother. And we knew right away that we had to come back to Selma, finish our obligation that we had as soon as possible, and come back and interview her and interview as many people as possible. And their voices had been missing, and some people had never talked to anyone else about the Teachers March beyond family members at that point. So it was really critical for us to find out exactly what happened on that day. And we did play detective. We were able to superimpose the film footage that I talked to you about that was in Eyes on the Prize and the Southern Poverty Law Center loaned us. We were able to take a New York Times article when we were able to interview Coach Huggins, and we were able to interview Reverend Reese. We were able to corroborate and find out exactly what happened. We were able to find out that Reverend Reese had a list of names. There are these important quotidian details that really bring the story, humanize the story. It's one thing to say that someone was involved in the civil rights movement or the voting rights movement, and it's quite another to show what did that look like? What did that feel like for 15-year-old Joyce Parrish O'Neill, who didn't know if her mother was going to come back home, at the march, and that people were looking when they came back to Brown Chapel, did my mom come back? Who came back? Were they jailed? And that's very real. That's a real moment and a real sense of fear that as humans we can all relate to, and as young people.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I want to ask then, how did it work? You're capturing this. You talked about capturing the voice and the feelings. How did it work to work together, having an illustrator and the writers being two different people? How did you get it to join up? Or these pictures that you created, Charlie, really brought to life the words that they put on the page?
It's rare that the authors and the illustrator actually connect very much. Usually that all goes through an editor and an art department at the publishing house. And it was pretty much that way too, although, we did have some back and forth. But it's always really wonderful to see what an artist is going to bring to your writing, because they always go above and beyond what I could ever imagine happening on the page. I think visually, but I don't create visually. And, Charlie brought so much to that, his own research, his own style, his own, there's so much emotion on every page of that book that I just felt grateful to see that end result.
And through our interviews, maybe because of my TV background and just speaking to people, the moments that they also remember are sensory moments. Reverend Reese said that all the women teachers had flat shoes on. Joyce told us that her mom wore a brooch. She had a sandwich in a paper bag. So then that day becomes more palpable. I checked the weather reports because Coach Huggins had said that it was a windy day, and indeed it was. As a matter of fact, that lunch hour where they started to march, there was a huge gust of wind. So we could just imagine that, Reverend Reese is holding his list as the wind, kicks up. There had been snow the night before. So he was wondering, would anybody show up? And if they didn't show up, in a way, he wouldn't blame them because of the fear, because of the weather, because of what was at stake. So to be able to put that on the page and, then Charlie taking it to a whole new level, it was really an incredible experience for us. And we're just so grateful that we could be conduits for the story.
I have a quick question. This is for Rich and Sandra. Do the editor bring you samples of the artist's work? Or is it just, the first time you see it is when it's first presented to you in the final illustration?
That's great. I'm just going to backtrack a little bit too, because we're always told that don't connect with the illustrator. And, we immediately break that barrier. We emailed you and we were just excited and honored. And we feel, this is a true collaboration. Why wouldn't we connect? Why wouldn't we be available to answer questions or to make it the best book it could possibly be? So I think it's interesting. We're always asking for, can we get a sneak peek? Please, can you show us anything? I think they're very concerned about, rights or something accidentally being seen on social media. So really, we saw your spreads pretty late. We did see a little bit of the cover, and we were blown away. We could feel a connection with you, even though we hadn't met you. We had heard that the story resonated with you as well. So I think we're working hard in the publishing industry to break down that barrier, that it's not author and illustrator. We are book creators together, and this is a big part of our lives that we're spending on, especially on these true stories, that we want to honor these heroes and amplify their voices, and let's do it together.
So that might be just one more thing. It might be really odd for an artist to think, but this is the standard in the industry. And it's like I've done, I think, 8 books now, and I've met probably two authors, and one was later on in the process, but I've never met most of the authors. And so I get the assignment, I do the work. And it's a fascinating thing because I did discover in the case of meeting the author that it can delay the process sometimes, especially if the author has a clear vision as to what it should look like. It's going to slow down the process. But there are times if you're right on par, it flows very easily. And I found that there are times I have questions about certain details, like when I did the plan, the People's Plan, the Nelson Mandela book, and I'm trying to imagine Winnie visiting Nelson Mandela, and I had this image I had painted, and she's like, "Oh no, that would never happen." And like that's a good thing to know. I'd already finished the illustration, so I had to go back and re-illustrate that. So it's like there are little things that the author, of course, knows because they've gotten that additional detail that may not be in the book, but could help us. Like I don't recall ever being told that it was a windy day. I don't remember that, and I don't know if I captured that, but that could have been something even more fascinating to have, did something where you show leaves flying and dress flying or something more dramatic. But it's still, in the end, it works, but you just have to kind of trust the process.
It's funny because I'm so visual, I usually try and get as much. Sometimes I get up to 200 or 300 photos or information that I collect. We collected a lot of yearbooks from Selma High School and Clark Elementary. And we automatically, we're getting this for Charlie, we're getting this for Charlie. And, you could sort of see the art director kind of a pause, like, well, we don't want to overload Charlie. And we just say, please make sure that he knows that this is out there for you. And I think you probably, did you appreciate the yearbooks and those visual times of really seeing, Joyce at 15, what she looked like?
Yeah, it's always helpful. It's always helpful, like for me, give me all the information that you can, and then I will sift through it and see what applies and what I can use. But the more I have, the more I have to work with.
That's great.
I have a question for Charlie. So when you receive the manuscript, the book, are you given any specs about how they are imagining, how the publisher is imagining the book should look like, what the layout will be? Like I'm thinking, like if some books have an image on one page and text on the other, but this book is beautiful in that the art fills the entire page, both 2-page spreads often. So it's amazing. But I'm wondering how those decisions are made, and when you're working, are you seeing your work on, oh, this would be great for a spread in the book, or this would be great for a smaller image? Do you think in that way?
You know what? A very, very good question. I love the process of handing it over to a designer, an art director, to see what they do with it. Okay. What I do, I do create what's called bleed, which is a lot of extra space and room. Sometimes I do imagine the area, the copy standing alone. Other times I do visualize text going on top of an area, so I try to simplify it. But it's a combination, and I'm always kind of fascinated, excuse me, I'm always fascinated by what ends up happening once it gets into the hands of the graphic designer. But no, I usually, like what I do, which sometimes creates a bigger problem for me, is I end up doing a lot more illustrations than I actually need to because I see so much. And so there are times I will present, almost every book I've done, there are additional illustrations that were not used because I see so much, and it's like, we need more room for copy or whatever. It's like, okay, it makes perfect sense, but I kind of felt that image would work. And so I'm always surprised when I look at it, oh, they never used that image. And that happens all the time too.
Charlie, how many iterations of the cover did you produce?
I believe there were 3 versions. And that was one of those things I noted. It was information that you all shared, and I Googled, and it's like, it's wonderful when you start to hear about people and you Google them, And all of a sudden, there it is. There's the march, and there's Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, and there's Reverend, like standing right beside them. It's like the picture was always there, and there he is. And it wasn't like that obvious until you go back to it and say he was always there. It almost seems at times like he wasn't there until you looked him up. But when you begin to become aware of who were actively involved with certain things, then you start to Google them, and you see, there they go, standing by Martin Luther King, or there they go, standing next to whoever that other historical figure is. So like what Sandra talked about, the unsung heroes, they're always there. We just they don't make as much noise, or not noise. They don't even cry for attention. They are there doing their duty, doing their job, making their commitment. And somewhere in it, hopefully, someone will give them their flowers before they're gone. And so like to hear that, like even in the case of this book, creating it and knowing that certain people that you're honoring won't get a chance to see it saddens me. And it happens a lot with things I've done that's more historical in nature.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I noticed that too, that in so many of the iconic photos of the voting rights movement, you see King, you see John Lewis, you recognize them. And F.D. Reese is in so many of them with him, as you pointed out.
Right.
So we're glad to be bringing him to the forefront.
As a matter of fact, sometimes he's misidentified in photos, and we've contacted AP, the Associated Press, and say, you have misidentified this person. Honor him with the correct name. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, because they say, yeah, but this was the name that we were given in 1965. Well, you were given the wrong name or no name. So so there's still so much work to be done in terms of honoring and having these voices be heard and acknowledged and celebrated and elevated.
With that, it kind of, with both of you guys, all of you saying this reminds me of why Daryl and I started this journey. Oh my God, so long ago, a year and a half ago, is that Key State College started as a normal school, which was for educators, and we're educators. And one of the things that we really value is how do we teach future teachers to be advocates? Because in some ways, teachers are always, they're part of that huge group of unsung heroes. They are working tirelessly to make a difference with very little recognition. So, which is why we wanted this to be the book of the year, and also why we chose that image, the first picture that you illustrated, Charlie, with Reverend Reese teaching in front of the classroom, because we felt that was a powerful message. I think Daryl, you said that is still relevant today for our students. So with that, I have a whole to my question. What do you want people to take away from the Teachers March? So you hear what we're taking away and what we're trying to do with it, but when you hear children, teachers, people in the community, when they read it and see these images, what do you want them to take from it?
I want them to take away the things we were talking about, that everyday people are the ones who really get the work done. King is the iconic leader of this, but for every king, there were thousands of other foot soldiers in the movement taking this on a daily basis. So that's the sort of thing that an individual in a group can really bring about change when they're committed to a cause.
The Voting Rights Act technically passed when, in 1965 in August, President Johnson signed it into law, but it was secured and it was fought for by persistent peaceful protests of thousands of everyday people and community leaders like Reverend F.D. Reese and the teachers who marched. And I really feel that the Teachers March demonstrates the power of collectivism, the power of peaceful protest, and the power of standing up for your rights, even if it's dangerous.
I think that I would even go as far as to say, because I worked in a series called the Silent Series where I used the American flag. My message is always to young people. I'm so proud of what the young people have done in the last year and a half. as far as protest and standing up, and the creative ways in which they're doing it. It's like you're relevant, you're important, you can make a difference. And I think that's the message that becomes very important. And again, going back over and over again to the unsung heroes, it's those people that we don't talk much about. And like, it's not uncommon. I can't remember who shared the story. I don't know if it was Rich or Sandra. We talked about many of them did not share their story outside of their homes. But what I've discovered with many people that were actively involved with the movement, the civil rights movement, that they didn't even share it with their family members. Because there also is a great deal of trauma that's part of the experience that they don't want to go through again. And I've had that experience over and over again with things that I've done, where I'm hearing my generation and maybe a little bit younger say that my parents never told me they were put in jail or were beaten or protested. And it's like, and that's not the point. The point is they were willing to sacrifice, and they didn't feel as if their story was relevant or important, or again, they're traumatized by it and they don't want to discuss it anymore. But it's so important that we know our history, know where we've come from.
We've been told that putting the Teachers March story, validating it, and having it in a book by a major publisher that everybody can read has really opened up a conduit and an avenue for families, like Charlie said, to have discussions and a sense of really claiming your place in history. And talking about your place in history and what you did, and using that as an avenue to say, what can you do now as a legacy to your family, as a legacy to humanity and generations. So we're really honored. You know, one of the most touching things we heard was in Coach Huggins retraces his footsteps during the anniversary every year of the Teachers March. And we were hoping to be with him in 2020, but the pandemic had other plans, but he still marched, and he marched carrying a copy of the Teachers March. And it really meant so much to him. He was hugging that book the entire way. And he said, this is me. I am in the book, and people can read about this forever.
Well, and I think that what's important is it does share history, but as Daryl also stated, that a lot of the things they're sharing in it are relevant still today. And that that maybe with children reading it, that it gives them a chance to understand what power they have for change. So we keep moving forward. So my Daryl, do you have any other questions before the last question?
Just one comment. I'm not sure if it's a question, but I know it's a comment. Definitely, we'll start with the comment first. As I'm listening to your responses, and thinking about the importance of the current generation understanding the importance of historical accuracy and historical documentation. It seems like there are, in the past year, as you mentioned, Charlie, so many protests, in the past 2 years, 3 years, right? So many protests, so much action has been taken. But I wonder, there are historians present in those groups. I wonder if it would be really helpful for students to understand how important it is to get everyone that was there, to make sure that you get the names of people that were there in the photographs, and sort of learning how to develop that skill set, that mindfulness about this is an event that happened. This is a part of our history. Mm-hmm. And we need to help the next generation, right, who's going to explore and come and find out, by having some sense of it's important for us to identify people that are in photographs. It's important for us to capture some of the details about what the day was like, what the weather was like on the day we had this protest. I'm excited about that. That's something that I will definitely be talking to my students about and engaging them in this conversation, because I think as an educator, an educator, but as a first generation college student, I knew, where I was smart. I knew I was not the only smart individual in my family, right? I just had access in a different way. And it was many years later in my adult life that I found out about the teachers that existed in my family. One in particular who was on the run from the Klan, right? And setting up little church front, little teaching areas, but on the move. I had no idea. But that sense of trauma, and I'm grappling with how do we document and deal with that those traumatic experiences that people don't want to share, because there's so many stories out there that need to be told. And I thank you all for the work that you do. And I would have thought that you were in communication with each other. The book is so wonderful and everything connects so well.
We've done a couple of events together, but not so much through the process of creating the book.
Daryl, you want to talk about just sort of documenting history, but also contextualizing that. I would also recommend, when we learned about this event in January of 1965, I also went back and looked at articles to see what went down 6 months before the summer of 1964 in terms of what led to the propulsion and the urgency of this movement. And of course, Selma shut down that anyone, for 2 people or more, it was illegal for them to march or to protest or even to gather to talk about voting rights. And I looked up and realized that, just a few days before December, the holidays, when Dr. King was planned to attend and to break this and to give teachers and others the strength to defy this order, there was a smoke bomb that had been thrown in front of Brown Chapel. No one knew that or really realized that. It was a little footnote in the newspaper. And when I started to talk about that with the teachers, it just opened up a well of just that light bulb that said, yeah, that was another reason why we didn't think anybody would be around. So look at articles, look at weather, look at events that happen, and you just never know what you can. Charlie said that he does more illustrations than are needed or that used. We tend to feel that we probably do more research that are used, but it just makes for a richer complexity, complex story, and that contextualize. And again, it's those quotidian details that can ground and connect a child, that it can just say, wow, that danger feels really real to me right now as I'm reading that story, and I can connect with that.
Yes.
Daryl, something you said made me think just now too about, we're writers and artists. We chronicle things that have happened in the past, but what it's really done for me personally too, and I know for Sandra, and I'm certain for Charlie too, because he's in Nashville right now doing community service. We've been inspired to leave the page and actually become advocates as well, to do community service work right here in where we live, and try to make changes on a micro level that are everyday kind of things that we can be doing that are helping to make the community a better place. And I think more of us who are in creative fields ought to be thinking that way as well. Maybe Charlie, maybe you want to speak a little bit about what you're doing actually in this moment outside of this interview, where you are today in Nashville.
Okay, well, two quick thoughts. I'm sorry, I have to leave in a minute. First, Daryl, I love what you're saying, but how often has it happened where who knew this was a moment in history as it was happening? Like, to be in a moment and not know, like my wife and I just came back from New York, and we had a dinner where we invited people, and we did not expect everyone to show up, and everyone did. And we took no photographs. And the people we connected with that day, it's like, this could have been historical in where we are right now and the conversations that we're having. But that was an afterthought. So who knows when this should be documented. And I don't know if everything can be, Secondly, it's like, yeah, so we had made a conscious decision. My wife is a professor. She resigned from UCLA and took a job with Emory that she starts next year. But and it was one of those things that it was several universities offering her a position, and she had decided that she was going to take a sabbatical regardless of where she went to work on a book on education. And in the midst of it, one day I come home and she informs me that she had just spoken to Fisk University's vice president, and they're opening John Lewis Center for Social Justice. And they're appointing a president under the name of Diane, well, getting Diane's name right now, who's part of the civil rights movement. Diane Nash. Thank you. Diane Nash will be the title of the position, and my wife is coming in to define the duties of that position and also help Fisk to find an applicant. They wanted her. She's not available, but she informed me one day, I want to go to Nashville for a year, and instead of working on my book, I'm going to spend the time there. And I'm like, let's go to Nashville. And I know enough people in the arts department that perhaps I can go in and be a resident artist, so I can really help the young Black artists on the campus, but also ones in the community. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now, is we're working to help expose a lot and bring in. We've had a conversation about the idea that we're not here to change Fisk. We're here to change to make people more aware of the university. And so our role is outside of that campus to bring in talent, to bring in resources to do something so that Fisk doesn't have to continue to struggle like many Black universities do every year from a financial standpoint. So, I mean, that's kind of like I'm working on that. I'm working on a couple of books, and I'm working on taking a break. That's one of those things I have not done enough of. And my wife is kind of like saying that you need to take a break. And so I'm going to be still for the next couple of months after we leave the campus.
Good. Take a break, definitely.
We thought about taking a break, but, I'm a first-gen kid. I'm a refugee's daughter. So I'm the first in my family, like you, Daryl, to go to college. I'm the first in my family to grow up speaking English. So, I take civic activism. I take voting rights really seriously. I was born in Canada. I became a U.S. citizen on December 16th, 2016. I voted for the first time federally in 2020. I was the first one in line. Coach Huggins called and congratulated me. That was really, really incredible. And so what Richard said about us focusing on community, that's what drives me, is being a first-gen kid and taking advantage of all the opportunities that my family worked so hard for me to have, and giving back and supporting first-gen kids as well. So to be able to have started the all-volunteer nonprofit, The Daily Good, in New Hampshire, and to create global foods pantries on campuses like Keene State College. I think we're going on providing 20,000 free food items a year. Really shows me that one person, that two people can make a difference, can connect with community, break barriers, and create change. The old standard used to be that to start a new a nonprofit, you had to be wealthy, you had to have a platform. You just need to be human and be passionate about something and start that. And I just love that those barriers have been broken.
So I guess I know that you only have a little bit of time, Charlie, so I'll have you go first just in case. So what would you guys are artists, advocates, writers, researchers, all these things, what would you give as advice to our college students? If you could tell them one thing.
You know what? The easiest answer to that is dare to dream big, and do not let your fears overrule your dreams.
That is a powerful one. I think I'm still trying to live today. How about, thank you. And Rich and Sandra?
I just say take advantage of as many experiences as you can. When I look back at my college years, I was living right outside New York City. I went to museums, I went to Broadway shows, I went to rock concerts. I wish I had done a lot more of those things when I had that opportunity as a person in my early 20s. Look for things that, well, maybe that appeal to me, maybe it won't, but I think I ought to try it at least.
Yeah. I think it's don't be intimidated. I learned that early on through my family history and through breaking a gender barrier in sports, becoming the first woman to host an NHL broadcast on national TV with about a million male reporters rooting for me to fail. So yeah, I learned so much from other people. Don't be intimidated enough not to shine and be the full expressions of who you are, but also to go and ask people if you don't know, if you really want to find out information. People are accessible and more accessible than you think. For instance, the teachers who are still around and from the Teachers March, or even books that we have done, that people we've interviewed, you can connect with them. You can talk to them. You can talk to people in your community and reach out, and don't let a barrier of not knowing someone or thinking they're not going to answer my email or my text or a phone call be a barrier, because if you don't try, you're not going to succeed at that.
And with that, I do want to thank you both, all three, for coming and speaking to us today. And I think that to end it, that's why we in the education program wanted the Teachers March to be our book of the year. And part of it is in New Hampshire, they have that law that they passed about, what's the technical name of it, Daryl?
I block it out, so I'm sorry.
I'm forgetting, it's like HB 162. But it's not wanting to bring some of these issues or having the divisive concepts discussed in schools. And we shared this with our local schools, and we're offering them the books as well, because we think this is a way to get to, these are real stories. We need to share these, and we need to advocate that children get an opportunity to hear these stories so that they get to question and ask things and learn and grow into people who want to make a change when they graduate. So thank you so much for all the work that you've done on this book, and we're excited to share it.
Absolutely.
Tanya, were you looking for a critical race theory?
Critical, yes, but they didn't use that term in New Hampshire.
No, they used divisive concept.
So, that's the concept, but it was divisive issues. They like to use specific terms.
Well, this is the perfect opportunity. You have contemporary educators today in New Hampshire wanting to take power away from humanity and from hidden heroes from the Teachers March. These are teachers that claimed their power and claimed their civil rights, helped pass the voting rights. So I think this is just a natural that this book is selected.
It is. And what's funny is when we presented it to the local superintendent, they looked at Daryl and I, and they go, "Are you two trying to cause trouble?" And I said, "Always."
Yes, absolutely. Every day, every second.
It's really interesting how that term has been so generational and you find the people in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and on who quote unquote caused trouble or were troublemakers are now heroes and civil rights icons. So that's really important for young people to know too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This was so powerful. We want to thank you all for your time.
Thanks for championing the book. Really appreciate it.
Wonderful.
And
everybody take care.